Today we are going to see the history of Joan of Arc. If we run through all the great names of the world and think of all the great things men have ever done, we shall find nothing to stir the human heart like the story of Joan. It is the most unbelievable thing in history, the greatest story, the most thrilling adventure, the most pathetic tragedy, and the most incredible fact in the story of the 1,000 years of Europe, and every word of it is true, says an English writer, Arthur Mee. The incredible episode took place in France 500 years ago. Most part of France was then occupied by the English army. The noblemen of France who controlled their country's destiny were either afraid of the English or collaborated with them in humiliating their own country. The King of France, Charles VII, who had not yet been crowned simply because nobody bothered about his coronation, was a coward and a stupid fellow. He was surrounded by a group of bullies and good-for-nothing men and women who exploited him and mocked at him. In other words, it was the darkest hour in the history of France, when the whole nation seemed to have been deprived of even the slightest sense of self-respect. Then comes the most fantastic part of the story. From a small village named Dumray, in a remote frontier of France, came a 16-year-old girl, an illiterate daughter of a poor peasant, and she announced that she had been instructed by God to deliver France from foreign tyranny and to pull the hapless prince out of his hiding and to crown him as a king. It is not difficult to imagine what should be the reaction of the people to such a claim by a rustic girl. She would naturally be called mad, and no doubt people called her so. But not for long. There was something strange in her voice which at once convinced her listeners that she spoke nothing but the truth. There was something divine in her look which at once inspired a flame of courage even in the dullest heart. Joan went to the nearest officer and asked him to provide her with escorts, for she must meet the king. The officer was first dismayed, then he looked puzzled, but ultimately he yielded. Joan appeared before the king, while the courtiers laughed at her, but she whispered to the king something which instantly changed his mocking mood into a most serious one. Nobody knows what Joan told him. Soon Joan won the hearts of all the able commanders of France. So far as the common soldiers were concerned, they came to look upon her as an angel. She was called Joan the Maid. Clad in white, riding a horse, Joan, followed by the French army, stormed into the English strongholds. "You have no business to be here on the soil of France. God has given you a country of your own. Go back there." This was her command to the English, and the English dispersed before her like dry leaves in a hurricane. There was not a single battle in which Joan did not win. After a series of victories, she arranged for the king to be duly crowned. In a few short months, she gave her motherland freedom, revived in the people the lost sense of patriotism, and gave the country a legitimate king. But the gratitude indeed is a rare virtue. As soon as the forlorn king had got back his dignity and authority, he betrayed Joan. At the king's hint, the army deserted her, and she was sad, but she knew that her mission had come to an end. In fact, she had predicted beforehand that she would live only a year more. In the meanwhile, the religious heads of her country had grown terribly jealous and afraid of her. According to the church, nobody could have any communion with God except through the agency of the church. Joan said she saw the vision of the saints and heard their voices. It was her say. She must be a witch. The nobility of the country had become extremely intolerant of her. They wanted luxury, fun, and sport. The presence of Joan made them uneasy, for she always spoke of truth, God, and such great things. All conspired against her. Shame of shames, her own countryman handed her over to the English, the enemy. She was thrown into a dungeon, her hands and legs in shackles, and some brutes cutting jokes at her constantly, but nothing could disturb her equanimity. She was tried by a panel of clever men claiming to have the license from God to be cruel towards her. They were her countrymen appointed by the English. The farce went on for 3 months. Joan refused to admit that she had done anything wrong. My voices were of God, she insisted, and they were even her last words when her judges put her on a platform and lit fire to burn her. So Joan the Deliverer was burnt alive by people whom she had delivered. But she bore with it, for she knew how ignorant the people were. Her tragedy is one of the saddest comments on human nature, but her character is among the brightest and the most precious possessions of humanity. The truth makes itself felt in due course. After a few years, all repented for their treatment of Joan. The Pope declared that she was a saint. Since then, innumerable memorials have been built to her. Her glory is sung in numerous verses. Thanks for watching, friends. Support us by subscribing our channel. Thank you so much.